You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Ask A Gettysburg Guide number 3. And I'm sitting here once again with Tim Smith and Bob Steenstra. Hello, boys.
Hello.
How are you doing? And you know what? Let me just take a moment. We recently launched a Patreon account, and what was that? Monday. Today's Thursday, and already I've got 15 patrons, and one of them actually upped the amount that she's pledged, which I didn't know you can do until now, so that's great. But awesome. I want to thank you guys for all that, and I hope you enjoy the content over there. And for those of you who like the all the free episodes on this feed here that you're listening to this on, and you want to learn more and also support the show so that we can get more free content out to you, then Patreon is the way to go. So if you go to patreon.com/addressinggettysburg, you'd be a real mensch. So thank you for doing that. Okay, so it's time for another Ask A Gettysburg Guide. We have a lot of questions to get to today. I think I'm actually going to break this up into 2 uploads. Let me start with Instagram Wunderkind History with Brad, and he asks, what is your favorite history movie that is most historically inaccurate? Does it have to, and it doesn't have to be a Civil War movie. Tim?
Wow. Well, definitely there's a lot of historically inaccurate movies out there. I think Civil War-wise, I'm a big fan of The Blue and the Gray.
Oh, yeah. That was a series, right?
So it was first a mini-series that was shown on TV. And I like the interaction of actual fact and absolute fiction,
right?
You know, in the mixture and how they handle it. I also like the Civil War battle scenes in which they are unable to produce a lot of extras. So you have 20 guys against 20 guys.
Right.
And I have always felt that one of the reasons why there's not more Civil War movies is just the scale of a Civil War battle and how you have to have thousands and thousands of people in these movies that attempt to do it before there was computer generated action. They had trouble getting enough people to do it. And now when there's some really incredible scenes, also the mixture of the story was really good. Colonel Sharp, and there was actually sort of a Jenny Wade character. I think her name might have been Mary Wade. And she was killed at the Battle of Hanover in this one. So Blue and the Gray.
It was the one with Stacy Keach, right?
Yeah, Stacy Keach.
And was it Virginia Madsen was the girl? Who was the woman?
Well, she's the one who was on Newhart. She was the maid.
Yeah, the blonde girl. Yeah, she was pretty.
Yeah, and she was the Jenny Wade girl.
Right. Okay. And that's the one where the Virginia boy moves up to Gettysburg to work for his uncle.
It's predominantly about two families that are 2 brothers, I guess, or is it maybe the brother and a sister? But one family lived in Gettysburg and one family lived in Virginia. Yes, and one of the boys of the family in Virginia came into Pennsylvania and worked at the Gettysburg newspaper, which they give a different name, Gettysburg Gazette or something like that. And he's an artist, and he's at John Brown's hanging, and he interviews John Brown.
He's like Forrest Gump. He's everywhere.
He meets Abraham Lincoln. In that one, the be-all, end-all scene. If you haven't done it, do yourself a favor. Get on YouTube, Google it. Gregory Peck does the Gettysburg Address.
Yes.
It is my favorite version of the Gettysburg Address.
Okay, nice.
All right.
And then now, so it's the North and South is the one with
Patrick Swayze.
Okay.
And Virgilia.
Virgilia
is my favorite character.
What a name that is. How about you, Bob?
Glory.
Okay. Very good. Why?
Boy, everything from the soundtrack, the Harlem Boy Choir, something like that, to the great actors in it. I'm not speaking to its historical accuracy necessarily, but then again, the question says
inaccurate.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, right. But it's a moving story.
It is. It's a great one. Okay. Grant Harvey 15 from Instagram asks, I've always thought that the 8th Illinois Cavalry fired the first shots at Gettysburg. However, other regiments claim to as well. How did this controversy come about, and who do you believe was really the first to shoot at Gettysburg?
That's interesting. Well, I guess it's a matter of perspective and what you actually count as the first shot of the battle. But, the main controversy is between the 8th Illinois and a guy in the 9th New York who later, I believe his name is Hodges, later says he fired the first shot from the bridge at Willoughby Run. And he is obviously mistaken.
Okay.
There's a lot of controversies like that where someone puts forth some false information. A short controversy starts and, people read it over the years and it continues. It tends to have a life of its own.
But let's get into some geography with that, though. So 8th Illinois is where?
8th Illinois has a vedette post along the Chambersburg Pike near Marsh Creek at the current, across from the intersection of Knoxland Road and Route 30.
There's a marker out there.
There's a marker. First shot marker says it's 7:30 a.m. Marcellus Jones took Sergeant Schaefer's carbine and fired a shot in the direction of the advancing Southerners.
Right.
And it's pretty well documented.
And there's if you look down the road, there's a bridge going over
across
the
Marsh Creek
run.
Bridge.
Yeah, the creek. And so now where's the 9th New York at this point?
Actually, the 9th New York should be somewhere north.
To the right of that.
That's
they
probably had
brigade.
squads on the Mumsburg Road, and perhaps they were out on the Carlisle Road, but this Wesley Hodges, I think his name is, off the top of my head, he writes that he fires a shot from the bridge at Willoughby's Run, in which would be much later in the battle, and it doesn't make much sense. But
because there are no. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but no Confederates are coming down the Mumsburg Road when the battle starts, right?
No, and he says I think it's on the Chambersburg Pike. He claims that he
claims he's
fires it. Yeah.
So maybe he was just hanging out with another regiment.
Just a later shot at a later point in the morning.
Right.
Or then the controversy morphs into other units saying, hey, but we fired the first shot. The 17th Pennsylvania Cavalry is north on the Carlisle Road, and at some point early in the morning, they skirmished with advanced elements of roads coming down from Carlisle. And, in some of these scouts that are on these roads, if they encounter Confederates early in the morning, I guess they have the right to say that they fired the first shot of the battle. But to be clear, in what we refer to as the Battle of Gettysburg, it was the 8th Illinois Cavalry that fired the first shot of the troops that led to the battle.
Right.
Tim, God said that. Morgan Freeman, wasn't he God too?
That's right. Yeah.
He's in the introductory film at the Visitor Center, and he says it was Jones of the 8th Illinois Cavalry.
If he says it, it must be true.
Marcellus Jones from Naperville.
The 8th Illinois fired the first shots at the Battle of Gettysburg.
I gave a tour to a guy on a Visitor Center bus tour, and I always asked, did anybody have any relatives here? And one guy this year said, yeah, his great, I think it was, grandfather was this guy named Jones from the 8th Illinois.
Oh,
and
cool.
this guy didn't even know that this was the first shot claim. He was very surprised when I told him.
Wow.
Now, on that particular type of tour, we couldn't go out there to look at the first shot marker, but I showed him the 8th Illinois monument, and I said, afterwards I gave him a map and said, here's where you go see the first shot marker if you
Wow, that's cool.
By the way, Matt, this question wasn't on my list of questions.
It's not?
No.
Oh, sorry. Well, it's in the Google Doc. Oh, because I copied and pasted it to you, and then I might have added it. Okay, sorry about that. Well, whatever. We'll keep you on your toes, Bob.
That's good.
But see, for me, the thing was always the first shot of the battle was the 8th Illinois, because after that first shot, it escalated into the battle.
That's correct.
So that's why I always look at that as the first, because then if you want to go with first shots, there were shots fired days before the Battle of Gettysburg. I mean, how far do you want to go?
Undoubtedly, there are single shots or exchanges of fire between the forces, on June 30th, on June 28th. You can build a case for anything once you start trying to build the case.
Yeah, right. Okay, let's move on here to NC History Nerd. You've answered questions pertaining to which units would be interesting to use as the basis for an hour of the battlefield. Is there a unique /funky perspective from which to tour the battlefield that you've tried or have always wanted to try? I guess What I guess like he's asking, if there's something that you've wanted to do but you haven't done because people don't ask for it, or it's not a standard tour,
so
or what? I don't know.
Bob. One just came to my mind as you read this. Richard Adams, who wrote Watership Down about the rabbits, he wrote a book from traveler's perspective of the Civil War. Robert E. Lee's horse, his favorite horse.
Oh.
So it just occurred to me, I'd like to take it from a dog's perspective. A guy from the 5th Alabama Battalion claims that maybe the first casualty of the battle was this dog, a stray dog that had adopted the 5th Alabama.
Right.
There's Sally, of course, the dog who's on the 11th Pennsylvania's monument. There's Gracie, who I think was the name of the dog the 1st Maryland Battalion had. And the dog is written about. A lot of it would have to be like Adam's book, fictional, but I think that would be interesting perspective.
Okay. All right. How about you, Tim?
Well, a lot of times people ask us to give tours on a certain perspective of the battlefield, to do the battlefield through a certain unit. So we have done that. I do a lot of tours if I generate my own tour and offer it. I do things like the farms at Gettysburg and tour the battlefield, not talk about the battle, but the people that lived in the farms around the battlefield. That kind of perspective. Or
because you wrote a book about the farms, didn't you? Yeah.
Or sometimes I do monument tours where I go from place to place to place and talk about the monuments and the stories of the monuments and how they were erected, or just stories behind the monuments. So we do a lot of that kind of thing. People often ask for their one specific relative, and they want the battlefield through their perspective. And, just on a general basis, if, because keep in mind, we do a few hundred tours a year, and occasionally you might have had enough and you don't want to do the same tour, so you just change the tour a little bit without the people knowing it. So oftentimes I'll ask the people where they're from. And if they say they're from Boston, then Boston won the Battle of Gettysburg. And I'll just go from place to place and talk about Boston and the battle, or I'll try to tie their town in. It's usually better if I have an obscure town that I have to try to tie in. We do a lot of school groups with 8th graders from Michigan. Okay. And so, I'll ask them where they're from in Michigan, and I'll tell a story about somebody from their county, or, if I know it from their town. And
you know this ahead of time.
No,
Usually, with the bus groups you do, right?
Yeah, you can.
Yeah.
You, a few days. I don't look too far ahead.
Right.
But no, a lot of times I just, off the top of my head, I'll just try to remember stories about little towns and stuff.
Well, this is the guy that memorized down to regiment level, so you've got the brain for that recall there.
And then, nowadays we have rosters of all the men who were killed in the battle, and in these different books that are available, like John Busey and his son wrote a book on Union casualties, and you can look up their towns. So if I do have advanced warning, I can go on my shelf, pull out a book, and look and see what guys were killed from their town, and then bring that in. Okay. I think my most successful venture in that phase was, in that sense, was I had a group from Michigan, and they were from, I believe it was Mill Place Middle School or something like this, Mill Creek Middle School.
Mill Creek, okay.
And they were from Dexter, Michigan. And I mentioned, Colonel Harrison Jeffords of the 4th Michigan, bayoneted to death in the wheat field, died here, and he's from your town. And it just coincidentally happened that he was buried in a cemetery next to their school.
Oh, wow.
Cool.
They all knew about him.
Did you show them the picture of Jeffords on the Wayside exhibit, or couldn't you get a bus in there?
No. Yeah, I did. Well, we walked over there, and then I made them read the poem on the bottom of the monument. That is really crazy if you ever get a chance to read the poem on the bottom of the 4th Michigan monument about his death.
Real quick, the book that you wrote about farms is called what?
Farms at Gettysburg.
Farms at Gettysburg by Tim Smith. You can find that, I'm sure, on Amazon.
It's distributed through Americana Souvenirs.
Okay, very good.
Gettysburg.
All right, C. Witt asks, why do you believe Lee continued his invasion given his claim of lack of cavalry support? Was it too far to turn back, or a lack of confidence within Bowdoin's command?
What does that mean, turn back?
Go back into Virginia, I guess.
I don't see Lee doing that.
No.
He's already up here. He's close to Harrisburg. He hasn't been beaten by these Yankees really yet. I can't see Robert E. Lee, that audacious man, turning around.
Right.
I think also we look back on this, with hindsight, and we're like, okay, this is a major problem prior to the battle with Lee's army, that he's moving through the Pennsylvania countryside in close proximity to the advancing Northern Army without a screen in front of him, to determine the exact whereabouts of the Northern Army. And we see that. But for Lee, first of all, he believes Jeb Stuart will show up any moment, continuously until the moment Jeb Stuart does show up. And so, he doesn't look at it as a long-range problem. It's a problem he's having, and he thinks it's going to resolve itself at any moment. And then, of course, we look at things like the fact that General Heath's division is moving to Gettysburg on July 1st without a screen of cavalry in its front and blindly runs into John Buford's Union cavalry. Why was not a detachment of cavalry placed in front of Heath? Now, you might point out the obvious that Lee has a force with him that he could use for such a purpose. And, the texter here, what do we call the people that send the messages in?
The listeners.
The listener. The listener is asking about his confidence in Imboden, but he has other people with him too. As a matter of fact, I think if you look at the numbers, and Bob could address this, I think he has more cavalry with him than Jeb Stuart does. So he has the bulk of it. But it's not really the men himself that he misses. It's the person, Jeb Stuart.
And the quality work that he gives.
And then, that's the other issue, too. I think this is interesting, just, to step back for a moment to the bigger picture of things. Why is it that people believe, and when I say people, I mean like everyone who reads and writes about the battle, that Jeb Stuart is going to be able to provide Lee with valuable information? For 2 years, they've been in Virginia. And let me point out that Jeb Stuart's job in gathering information about the whereabouts of the Northern Army is something like sending someone over to a farmhouse and knocking on their door and saying, hey, have you seen the Yankees? And the person at the farm says, yes, they're in those woods over there. And then he provides that information. How is he going to gather information in Pennsylvania?
Good point.
I would say that his absence was felt more during the battle. On the first day, he could have been protecting Ewell's left flank, allowing Ewell the use of 2 more brigades to perhaps attack Cemetery Hill or check out Culp's Hill. I think during the battle that it was a bigger loss for Lee.
So is it fair to say then that the Stuart's absence is kind of exaggerated or overemphasized in kind of going along with the whole shoes thing? Is it's more dramatic to make it seem like Lee is sitting there just feeling around blind?
I don't know about that, because the Stuart's intelligence would have been helpful. I'm just saying that but it wasn't his being here would have helped more during the battle, especially on the first day when Ewell decides it's not practical to attack the hill. He hears a report there's a corps of Union infantry coming into York Road, which wasn't true.
Right.
And I think had Stuart been here, he could have relied on that kind of information. No, it's not. It's another road they're coming in on.
Sure.
But also, let's not forget that what would cavalry have done? How much earlier would they have made contact with the Union Army at Gettysburg? I don't think they would have made it any faster than the infantry brigade of Pettigrew made it. I mean, in a sense, they did know there was a Union cavalry division at Gettysburg on the day before the battle.
Right.
That report just wasn't believed.
Yeah, right.
It just wasn't believed.
Yeah. So it's not right. It's not like they didn't know what they were going into.
Well, two things. First of all, I think when you mention that is that it is a big issue for Lee, that he doesn't have information about the whereabouts of the Northern Army, and he's moving towards Gettysburg without a perfect knowledge of how many Union troops are in Gettysburg, what roads the rest of the Union Army is using to march on, how far are they away. And Jeb Stuart's presence could have assisted with all these things. There's no doubt about that. But in the bigger scheme of things, I'm sure everyone realizes that the reason people bring up things about Jeb Stuart like this is because they want to blame him for not being here and thereby provide Lee with an excuse as to why the South lost the Battle of Gettysburg.
Right.
So it quickly gets into this bigger thing.
Yeah, it can't just be that Lee lost the Battle of Gettysburg because he was bested.
Can't have it.
Okay, the Great Tronetti. He is back to dazzle us with some of his inquisitiveness. He's got 3 questions, and we're going to take them one at a time. First of all, the roles of the 6th and the 12th Corps in the battle. He never really hears about them. So how about them? The 6th and the 12th Corps, what were they doing?
One thing about the 12th Corps I would point out in the battle is that the 12th Corps had been shifted from the Army of the Potomac into the Western Theater, as we term it. The 11th and 12th Corps, of course, became incorporated as the 20th Army Corps eventually and were involved in Sherman's March to the Sea. And apparently their official reports were not available to General Meade when he wrote his official report of the battle. And the 12th Corps historians complain about this later, that because General Meade and some of the early histories of the battle don't mention the prominent role that the 12th Army Corps played because they don't have access to the information properly, that their role in the Battle of Culp's Hill is diminished. Also, you might argue with the 12th Corps that because they're fighting in the woods and because no one sees the broad spectrum of the battle, there's no massive charge across an open field. It's not, that everybody's only writing about what's directly in front of them. As a matter of fact, there are no Medal of Honor winners, I believe, on Culp's Hill of the 63 Medals of Honor.
I think in the whole 12th Corps there weren't any, were there?
So again, it just seems as if for whatever reason, because they're on the defensive, they're on top of the hill behind the stone wall, they're a very successful defense of Culp's Hill. Right. They suffer low casualties, they inflict high casualties. No one sees what they do. They're on the flank. Nobody can look over and judge how horrible the battle was, and the timeliness of the official reports. All these things add to the 12th Corps not getting early credit, and that not giving early credit then leads into some of the major histories of the battle that were written early on, not including them prominently. Now, the 6th Army Corps. Should I do that one? Then you can tackle the 6th Army Corps. They arrived on the second day of the battle and did provide a valuable role in the battle. They actually came into position on the Baltimore Pike on Rock Creek and allowed General Meade to then shift his reserve, the 5th Army Corps, into the line of battle. So just by the 6th Corps arriving after a march of some 32 miles in 17 hours, the 5th Army Corps was able to be shifted, and they arrived on the battlefield just as the Southern Army was attacking. And of course, there was, the men of the 5th Army Corps that largely confronted the Confederate attack as Sickles was being driven back. So the 6th Army Corps are directly responsible for the 5th Army Corps' role. And the
5th Corps are the ones at Little Round Top, at the wheat field.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. And then elements of the 6th Army Corps actually participated in the evening of the second day of the battle in front of Little Round Top. They charged down into Wofford's brigade, and then also they were shifted into the area of Culp's Hill. And on the morning of the third day, Shaler's brigade played a role in the defense of Culp's Hill along with the 12th Army Corps. So, by arriving there, it placed them into a position where they could be used. And if the Southerners had not attacked on July 3rd, on the morning of July 4th, I have every reason to believe that the 6th Army Corps would have been used in an attack against the Southern position.
Right.
And then, of course, there could have been, if you're a fan of the idea that Meade should have counterattacked after Pickett's charge, it would have been the 6th Army Corps that would have taken that role.
So now, I hate these speculative things, but you always hear people saying, well, if if Hood had just been allowed to go around to the right, or if Longstreet had just been allowed to go around the right. But the 5th Army Corps would have made that a little difficult, wouldn't it? Especially if the 6th is coming up and frees them up to go and be the reserves or the reinforcements that they ended up being.
Once the 6th Army Corps arrives, the concept that the Southern Army are going to swing around behind Little Round Top is preposterous.
Yeah.
It's just ridiculous to bring up. I don't know if you ever read If the South Had Won the Civil War by McKinley Cantor.
Is that the one with the picture of the astronaut putting the...
that's Mark Nesbitt, If the South Had Won the Battle of Gettysburg. I know all these fictional books. But in McKinley Cantor's book, if I remember correctly, it's been a long time since I read it. I haven't said that. I think the 6th Army Corps is on their way to Gettysburg, and Hood Hood's division goes around Big Round Top, and the 6th Army Corps bumps into them and turns around and leaves.
What?
So Meade is without the 6th Army Corps, and that's one of the reasons they lose the battle.
See, but I always thought in reality they would just hit him in the rear. So now the flanker would be flanked and that would be it. Like Hood would be surrounded.
Yeah.
I don't know, but we don't know because it never happened.
The 6th Army Corps would, Hood's division, it was too much for him. They would have turned around.
Yeah. Right.
And then the other thing in the McKinley Cantor's book is at Vicksburg, Grant falls off his horse and hits his head on a rock and he dies. So then the course of that whole campaign has changed.
Why do people want the South to win so much? I mean, it's over.
So that we can have a Confederate astronaut on the moon.
All right, the other question he wants to know, explain the death of General Pender. Well, Jason, when you bleed, you die.
In a couple of sources.
How did he die?
I think most recently in Dr. Kelso's Last Invasion of Gettysburg, he quotes Lee, and I've read this a couple of other places, as saying something to the effect after the war, had Dorsey Pender stayed on his horse another half hour, we would have won the battle.
Lee said that.
That according to a couple of sources.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
Tim, are you aware of that quote?
No.
Okay.
Not off the top of my head, but I would say that, the exact site of Pender's death is one of those things that has been
established.
No, I would say, argued about.
Well, come on, Tim. On a tour this year, I saw a little flag right by the tree.
Yeah.
And it was a little Confederate flag, and on the back it said, "Thank you, General Pender."
So Pender is wounded on the second day, riding back to Seminary Ridge. I think there's an account where he might be with Perrin's brigade for a short time on the skirmish line around what we call the Gettysburg Rec Park, or when Perrin's brigade is down near Long Lane, and apparently he rode back up to Seminary Ridge, and most accounts kind of place it near the edge of the woods where the entrance is to McMillan's Woods, which is used by the horse tours to
the Boy Scout camping area.
The Boy Scout camping area, that he's along what now is Confederate Avenue along the top of that ridge. And I believe he's hit by shrapnel from an explosive shell, and he's mortally wounded, and he dies later. But here's the thing.
Down in Virginia, right?
Yeah. Here's the thing about Pender's, being taken out. His division, we talk about this thing on the second day where it's an echelon attack, and it's working its way up through
from south to north.
And Pender's not there, so if Pender was there, maybe he would have continued the attacks. Maybe he would have made sure that the attacks continued up the line. And Pender's down, and then Rhodes' division doesn't make the attack on West Cemetery Hill. Maybe if Pender was there, and he would have, helped with Anderson's brigade continuing the attacks. Anderson's division continuing the attacks against Cemetery Ridge, and then maybe if Rhodes' division would have went in on the West Cemetery Hill as he's supposed to, then on the other side of the battlefield, the reinforcements wouldn't be able to be shifted, specifically Carroll's brigade into East Cemetery Hill,
right,
to help defeat the Louisiana Tigers and North Carolina Tar Heels. So Pender's wounding at a very bad time, people suggest, and there's not many sources for exactly why the attack broke down, but if he was alive, maybe the attack would not have come unhinged as it had.
Just remember that this is late on the second day, and that Hancock, who's been made a wing commander, has already pulled some of his forces from opposite of where Pender's division would have been. And so if the echelon attack was designed to draw strength from the Union reserves and center to stop the earlier attacks of first Hood and then McLaws and then Anderson, and then the next division as you go north would have been Pender's. This theory behind this, had he stayed on his horse another half hour, we would have won, is that Pender's division would have crossed the field just north of and overlapping a little bit where Pettigrew's division attacked on July 3rd. Am I right about this, Tim?
Yeah, and of course the breakdown in the attack occurred within Anderson's division and not Pender's division,
right.
but Pender not being there,
Exactly. So if Pender might have gotten his division moving because of the breakdown that's happening, I think it was in Posey's brigade, he would have gotten his division to attack. And at that point in the battle, the theory would go, there weren't many Union soldiers on Cemetery Ridge like there was the next day. Okay, there's the opportunity.
And who was it? Lane that took over?
Trimble.
Well,
Trimble will replace Pender.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'd imagine immediately.
But immediately it would have been Lane.
But there's really, an effective command. Sometimes when the division commander goes down, someone is scheduled to take command, but do they ever exercise command of the division?
Right.
That's a big issue we have with Hood. When Hood is wounded, technically, Law takes command of the division, but the brigade commanders maintain, the other brigade commanders, that Law doesn't exercise a division command until the battle's over. So even though he takes over,
it's got to be hard to do in the middle of a battle, though.
Yeah,
to establish your headquarters and then get the word out while everything is going to hell.
Yeah. So with Pender's wounding, Trimble would be brought in, and on July 3rd, it would be Isaac Trimble, that leads 2 brigades of Pender's division in Pickett's charge.
Okay. And then he also wants to know about forgotten officers of the battle. So we always hear about Chamberlain and Hancock and Longstreet, Pickett, and Hood.
You have
all these big guys.
You have a later question about Patrick O'Rourke.
Yeah.
So I think it would be good to hear from Tim what he thinks about Patrick O'Rourke.
All right. Patty O'Rourke, Tim.
Well, Patrick O'Rourke is the colonel of the 140th New York on Little Round Top. And Patrick O'Rourke is... according to there's a whole bunch of different accounts of this part of the battle. So he's theoretically in the lead of Weed's brigade as they're coming onto the field when the 5th Army Corps shifted from reserve towards the area of a Little Round Top. And when Governor Kimball Warren reaches Little Round Top and realizes that reinforcements are needed on that end of the battlefield, that the Southern Army is attacking, and the Little Round Top has been vacated by the brilliance of General Sickles' forward movement, that he's got to bring troops there. So he sends a message to General Meade, and General Meade sends a message to General Sykes, and General Sykes sends a message to General Barnes, and we know that Vincent's brigade will arrive there. But General Warren himself realizes he needs troops immediately. So he takes off down the side of the hill, theoretically through along the north wooded slope of just where the modern Sykes Avenue is down to the Wheatfield Road. And when he rides down to the road, he rides right up to Colonel Patrick O'Rourke. Now, this event in the battle is very interesting to me. It's always been interesting to me because General Warren is a staff officer. He has no troops under his immediate command. He has some officers with him of the Engineer Corps, but he doesn't have like a group of men that he's in charge of. And we know on the battlefield, generals can give orders, but they might not be your general. You really have to listen to somebody giving orders who's not your general.
Right. It's like Bernie and Meade at Fredericksburg.
Yeah, it gets in this weird, conflict. Well, as luck would have it, General Warren had commanded a brigade earlier in the war, and at 2nd Manassas, for instance, and the 140th New York, Colonel Patrick O'Rourke was in his brigade. So he happens to ride down the hill, and he rides right up to a guy that he used to be in command of, who knows him personally. What are the chances
graduated
of that?
where in his class, Tim?
He graduated first in his class from West Point.
That was May 1861, and then the guy at the bottom of that class was George Armstrong Custer.
So Warren explains the situation, and Colonel Patrick O'Rourke detaches his regiment immediately from Weed's brigade, which is technically against orders.
And how big is this regiment?
526 men off the top of my head.
Yeah, it's something in that range. It's a big regiment.
It's a big regiment.
And I say that because it says 526 men on the monument.
I know, that helps.
So Colonel Patrick O'Rourke leads his men to the top of Little Round Top, and the first unit in line, Company A, goes from column into line without loading their muskets and charges into the Texans that are climbing up the slopes of the hill. And Colonel Patrick O'Rourke is killed leading the charge.
So right away, he's out.
And, but the rest of the regiment comes up, loads muskets, reforms, charge, drives the Texans back, Little Round Top holds. And, Colonel Patrick O'Rourke today, he has a statue in Little Round Top, and people rub his nose for good luck because he graduated first in his class and he's Irish. But, his luck kind of ran out that day. He was killed leading the battle.
Right.
But I would say that one of the reasons you don't hear much about him is because he was killed.
Very early.
Yeah. And,
he didn't have
so he
time
doesn't get a chance to write about what he did. And again, I mentioned this in one of our other episodes. If we don't have information written by you about what you did, sometimes historians gravitate to the information that is written, and so we don't have as much written by the guys who die as we do by the guys who survive. So a lot of the guys who died in the battle, in officers especially, played prominent roles in the actual moments of conflict, and we just they're not talked about as much.
Right.
Tim, I'm sorry, you finished with O'Rourke? Another officer.
Oh, we should have mentioned before you go on, we should have mentioned that O'Rourke does have a restaurant named after him, too.
That's right. Later, a question was coming from Darth Etzcorn.
Darth Etzcorn, yeah.
Darth Etzcorn. Mm-hmm. And this person is asking about Second Lieutenant Stephen F. Brown and the hatchet and the 13th Vermont.
Wow.
So we can kind of address both questions at once, too.
Sure, there you go.
Well, I think there's several versions of the Lieutenant Brown, Stephen Brown story. I think would
give us one of the versions so that the people that don't know.
I think, when I'm on tours, and you have to excuse tour guides for doing this, because, if I was sitting down and writing it out, I would actually use a quote from the original source, and I would make sure that everything I said was factual. But, you're on the battlefield, you're given a tour, you tell the story the way you learned it. You might even know that some of the details of the story are not exactly correct, or that you're sometimes in our haste to simplify a story, we combine several facts together. And, this is something that novelists do all the time, and they're excused for it. So I guess it's all right on the tour. But Stephen Brown, basically the story is on the march to Gettysburg, I believe he allowed some of his men to cross a log instead of marching through a creek. And, if you march through a creek and your leather shoes get wet and you march a few more miles, you're going to get blisters. So I forget the details. He allowed men to take off his shoes or some crossing a log, but he was placed under arrest for slowing down the march. So during the battle, Lieutenant Brown is under arrest. And just before Pickett's charge, on the third day of the battle, he's reinstated. And his sword had been taken from him, and he doesn't have a sword. So he borrowed a hatchet from the camp cook. And during the battle, during the height of the fighting, he leads a charge into a counterattack into the Southerners, and he actually, is chopping up Southerners with his hatchet. And he actually captures a Confederate officer, and captures a Confederate officer's sword, with only a hatchet. And the men, after the battle, remember him and the crazy attitude of, his charge and how brave he was. And so when it came time to put up the monument to the 14th Vermont in the 1890s, he is featured on the monument. And the original design for the monument, we're told, is Lieutenant Brown with the axe high in the air with a crazy look on his face leading the charge. But cooler heads prevailed, and the Monument Commission would not allow him with a hatchet in his hand. So if you stop by the 14th Vermont Monument today along Cemetery Ridge, you'll see Lieutenant Brown standing there, and he's got the sword from the Confederate officer that he captured in his hand. And on the back...
it's under his boot.
The sword.
The sword, right, sorry.
Yeah. And on the back of the monument, they tell the story. And then, as you just mentioned, the Vermonters got the last laugh because they put the hatchet that he used under his boot. And you have to kind of walk around the side of the monument and look, and the hatchet you can see under his boot sticking out the side of the monument.
That's awesome. You got to kind of look for it to see
it is interesting. I know that I've never really thought about it, but people are fond of saying that like it's a monument that depicts one of the lowest ranking soldiers on the battlefield as its central motif. But I mean, I guess that's not accounting for the fact that some of the regimental monuments actually show known people who are privates or sergeants.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Because they would say, when you talk about this, people are like, well, they're not officially that person. like Roland Morris, the color bearer of the 13th Massachusetts.
Yeah, wasn't that the rule that you can't depict an actual person?
Yeah, no,
for Pennsylvanians.
Yeah,
for Pennsylvanians.
Like, for instance,
unless you put their name on it, and then you had to put everyone's.
Yeah, the 83rd Pennsylvania monument, Colonel Strong Vincent, that's not Colonel Strong Vincent. It's just a guy who kind of looks like Strong Vincent.
It's
a lot like Colonel Strong Vincent.
Yeah.
Because had they put his name on the monument, they would have had to put everyone's name on the monument.
Well, I think I always thought that the problem with it is that at the time they're putting up monuments in the 1880s or, late 1880s for Pennsylvania, for instance, is that a lot of the colonels of the regiments are very well-to-do, or they're congressmen, or they're running for political office. And having your statue on a monument at Gettysburg would be beneficial to your political advancement. So they wanted to try to keep some politics out of if you allowed colonels to be put on monuments, all the well-to-do and influential colonels would have their monuments at Gettysburg.
Of course, Vincent had already been promoted to heaven by this time.
That's right.
He died 5 days after the battle.
Dead commanders probably shouldn't be accounted for in this. If I remember correctly, and our listeners can check me on this, I think the first monument on the battlefield outside the National Cemetery that depicts a officer in the battle, his likeness, maybe I'm really reaching here, is Augustus Van Horn Ellis of the 124th New York.
Okay.
Another one of those lower-ranking officers the earlier questioner wanted to talk about.
But he's got a statue on a monument. And
I think we're still in that question.
Oh, we are?
Yeah, we are.
Forgotten officers.
Yeah, forgotten officers. Van Horn Ellis.
With a great first name, Augustus Van Horn Ellis.
Yeah.
He's awesome.
Now tell us why. What did he do?
Oh, of course, he was the colonel of the 124th New York, who was part of Ward's brigade that fought in the defense of Devil's Den. And during the height of the fighting, as the Confederates were advancing on Devil's Den, the 124th New York is on top of the hill behind, in a defensive position behind perhaps a stone wall, behind some rocks. And
what are you talking, like triangular field area?
Yeah, they charged through and down into the triangular field. So above that, we generally refer to it as Houck's Ridge. And during the height of the fighting, one of the captains comes over and says, I think we should charge. And of course, they're on top of the hill behind some rocks. They probably shouldn't charge. And a few minutes later, after the Confederates are advancing and another column of Southerners is coming behind them, the captain rides up again and says, we need to charge. And eventually he brings up the horses, the men mount up. And another of the officers, the three officers, the Lieutenant Colonel Robert Cummings, the Major James Cromwell, and Augustus Van Horn Ellis mount. Lieutenant Colonel, he rides off to see about Smith's guns, and he's wounded apparently, and rides off, so he's not involved in the charge. But the major and the colonel actually lead a charge of the 124th New York down the ridge from the top of Houck's Ridge through what we refer to today as the triangular-shaped field into the Texas and oncoming Alabamians and Georgians. And another officer rides up to Colonel Cummings just before the charge and says, hey, I don't think this is a good idea. I'm paraphrasing. And that's where Colonel Augustus Van Horn Ellis says, the men must see us today.
The wrong men saw them today.
Yeah. So, and I think in that quote, he kind of sums up the role of the officer in the Civil War, showing that, that you might die, but you have to follow orders, and you have to lead the charge, and you have to, you're in charge. And so you set an example. And a lot of the times when that happens, the men die. Looking at everything that happened there in the next few minutes, they probably should have stayed on top of the hill.
Yeah.
But Augustus Van Horn Ellis is killed leading the charge. The major is killed, Major James Cromwell leading the charge. So they lose two field officers in that charge. And, you look around all the regiments in the battle that have three, they all have three field officers, the major, the lieutenant colonel, the colonel. Off the top of my head, I can think of the 69th Pennsylvania loses two of their field officers, but losing two of the three field officers during a charge is pretty severe.
Yeah.
And Cromwell, when he was shot off his horse, he split his head on a rock down there in a triangular field. And I can't remember who it was, but someone brought the body back up and placed it on the boulder where his monument is today.
Okay.
And for the listeners, right just north of Devil's Den, if you've taken the auto tour route, you've gone around Smith's Battery, those 4 guns at Devil's Den. It's the next monument. There's a very placid-looking colonel with his arms crossed over his chest. And that's Colonel Augustus Van Horn
That's
Ellis
him.
of the Orange Blossoms, the 124th New York.
All right, very good. Let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Think outside the bus and let Getty's Bike Tours show you the only way to truly experience Gettysburg. There's a reason why Getty's Bike Tours is the longest running bicycle tour company in Gettysburg, and that's because they put the customer's experience at the top of their list of priorities. Follow a licensed battlefield guide through some of the most legendary ground in American history. There's a tour route for everyone, from the newbie to the hardcore history buff. So go to gettysbike.com or call 717-752-7752 and book your reservation today. Mention addressing Gettysburg and receive 10% off your tour. That's gettysbike.com or 717-752-7752. Discount does not apply to rentals.
Okay, the last question from the Great Tronetti is, why don't we hear much about the assault of the Louisiana Tigers, and do you have any anecdotes from their fighting to share? Why don't we hear a lot about them? Because that was quite an interesting fight, wasn't it?
I don't know. I mean, I think, to me, I guess I thought we did hear a lot about it. But, okay.
Well, he's in high school.
It depends. It depends on, here's what I would say right off. There is no auto tour stop on East Cemetery Hill on our battlefield maps. So if you're taking the general tour of the battlefield, and, I tell you, a lot of what is popular about the battle and what is not popular depends upon, the tour route today.
Yeah.
So let me, if I go back in time machine here and visit with some of the veterans, make sure that you put your monument at a spot where people can visit it. I would suggest a parking place in front of your monument.
Sure.
But make sure your monument's on the tour route.
Or
Because
where
if you
a
have
bus
a
can
monument,
fit.
or a bus can fit, if you put a monument and it's not on the tour route, you're not going to get visited. And, in East Cemetery Hill, if you take the auto tour map today, you go, Culp's Hill's optional, obviously, but you get down to Baltimore Pike, go around Culp's Hill, and after you come off the summit of Culp's Hill, there's a little wayside exhibit on Stevens Knoll in front of General Slocum's monument. And it says East Cemetery Hill, and the text is like, look over there in the distance. The Louisiana Tigers attacked that hill during the battle. So you never actually go there.
Right.
There is no parking at East Cemetery Hill. You can actually go around into the private parking lot of the Gettysburg Tour Center and walk over to it. You can park over at the National Cemetery parking lot on the 2010 Road, walk through the National Cemetery, then walk out to Cemetery Gate and get to East Cemetery Hill. But East Cemetery Hill is a place that is not well visited.
Yeah.
And that is probably the main reason why the Louisiana Tigers are not talked about as much. The other reason is more to do with commercialization versus memorialization.
Okay.
If we tell the story of the Louisiana Tigers, we have to talk about the fact that they were at the bottom of Cemetery Hill on what is now the property of the Gettysburg Middle School.
Right.
And they lined up in that gorge along Weinbrenner Run or Culp Run, which today is underground on their parking lot. And then they charged up the side of East Cemetery Hill. And not just from the east, but from the north, and they charged across the Holiday Inn and across a housing development and across the Tour Center parking lot and across the Gettysburg Water Company's water tower. And they came up onto East Cemetery Hill.
Right.
Well, all that area is developed.
Right.
So I think sometimes when we point out places that are developed, people who don't want us to tear down that development are a little antsy about that. Why don't you talk about something else?
Right.
Oh, we don't need to talk about this so much. And I think there's a tendency in the park not to talk about that too, because then people might be like, wait a minute, you're telling me that all this area right here these houses should be torn down and we should preserve that as part of the park? That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But
And
I
the
don't think people
school,
want to hear that.
I never understood the school being there.
Well, one of the interesting stories, and we could do a whole show on the development of the Gettysburg National Military Park, but the area where the Gettysburg Middle School at one time was part of the Gettysburg National Military Park. As a matter of fact, you want a good illustration of this? Go to the Gettysburg Middle School tennis court. And there's an alley behind the tennis court at the back of Stratton Street, and there's still a pipe and rail fence for the National Montauk boundary.
Oh, yeah. I've always wondered what that was.
The park boundary went all the way out there. In the early 1940s, I believe. There was a nefarious deal between the National Park Service and the Gettysburg School District, and they made a trade for some land, and they built the middle school on what was already park property that we'd already preserved.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that piece.
We could do that, but
let's do that.
Anecdotes from the Jesus Brigade with the Louisiana Tigers. They had, I don't know, about 1,200 men here or so, and they came with an incredible reputation. A lot of these guys were rowdies from New Orleans. In fact, some North Carolinians from Heath's division had burned the Harmon buildings on the first day, and they're going to tell the fleeing inhabitants that they were the Louisiana Tigers, further adding to this reputation of these fierce men that had no moral scruples. There's a story that Fonts relates, Harry Fonts, on the second day of Gettysburg, about a boy from the 7th Louisiana is in the kitchen of a Gettysburg resident. Now, Hayes's men occupy the town, okay? And so this woman is scared to death probably as she's giving food to this Confederate soldier with a gun. And she's all worried about what might happen to her because of but at least she's not in the hands of a Louisiana Tiger, until she asked the boy what regiment he was in, and he said he was in the 7th Louisiana, which was one of the Louisiana Tigers. And according to Fonts, according to the account that Fonts is quoting, she faints at that point. In the attack of East Cemetery Hill, they're fighting amongst the batteries of the Union Army up there on Cemetery Hill. And a boy, I think from the 8th Louisiana, will say something like, I take command of this gun. And there was a German American. The 11th Corps is about 50% German immigrants. And this German American says, "Du sollst sie haben," which means, and you shall have it. And the cannon was loaded and he blew the guy away. William Poole, 8th Louisiana. A lot of people know about Mr. G's Ice Cream in Gettysburg. That's a Civil War house, the Weinbrenner house, I think that is. Weinbrenner. And right across the street, though, was the mirror image of that house. Today, it's where Unity Park is. Yeah. And the main battle line of the Confederates in Rhodes Division and Early's Division will be at Middle Street. Maybe not Rhodes, but Early's Division will be at Middle Street. But the skirmish line is up all the way to these buildings we're talking about where Unity Park is. And in the McCreary house, in the back door, the body of William Poole was found. I'd like to think of in a pool of blood, but he had apparently opened the back door and put a kitchen table down. And if he expected that kitchen table to stop the bullets of the Union skirmishers who were on higher ground south of them on Cemetery Hill, it didn't do its job. They found him dead there. So that's just a couple of anecdotes about Louisiana boys.
There you go.
My favorite Louisiana story is told by a civilian at the edge of the town, and she says before the charge on East Cemetery Hill, she looked out her window and the Louisiana Tigers had a barrel of whiskey, and they broke open the barrel and they mixed gunpowder in with the whiskey, and they were handing out shots to all the Louisiana Tigers of whiskey with gunpowder in it. It made them mean.
Wow. All right. Veronica Brestensky says, this is probably outside the scope of Ask a Guide. Not true. But if not, can you get Tim to talk about the Adams County Historical Society, how it came about, what they do, how they got their items, and what items do they have, etc. Maybe how it differs from the National Park Resources.
Now, hold it. This is near and dear to Tim's heart. He's worked for them for a long time. So, yeah, I was just sort of warning. This
we could probably do a whole and we should do a whole episode about this, too. But go ahead, Tim. Answer what you can.
Well, the Adams County Historical Society is, like many other places all around the country, our local county historical society. So it was, there were several attempts to create a historical society here in Gettysburg. The first attempt in the 1880s by Edward McPherson.
Okay.
And then there was another attempt in the early 1900s and then in the 1930s. But continuously, as we know it today, the Adams County Historical Society was established in 1940. And originally, we were in the basement of the courthouse. By the 1960s, our historical society started to grow in size. The courthouse wanted us out. At the same time, the Lutheran Theological Seminary was having trouble with their old dorm, where they housed the students, and they were moving to different quarters, and they were renovating the seminary campus. So the Adams County Historical Society, through the auspices of the county commissioners, were able to arrange for the permanent or the rental of the Lutheran Theological Seminary building. And then, of course, that has recently been, in the recent years, turned and converted into the Seminary Ridge Museum. And currently we are in a historic house along the seminary campus. But basically, the Adams County Historical Society is our local county historical society, and our job is to collect history and information about the county and the people who live in the county.
So not necessarily battle related.
No, not necessarily battle related. Of course, that a Battle of Gettysburg does tie into our mission as being part of the history of the county. But, on a day-to-day basis, and I do work there on Wednesdays and Thursdays and Fridays and Saturdays, and I generally, I'm the collections manager, so I spend a lot of time with the collection upstairs, but I also assist when people come in to do research. For the most part, we do genealogy. So people come in and they research their relatives. And we use our local resources as well as computers and databases from genealogical sources all around the country to help people do their family trees. But we also act as sort of a archives for the county. So we have all the tax records from Adams County, all the deed records, all the estate papers, like a county archives as well. And, we do have a Battle of Gettysburg resource room. So people can come there and they can do research on the Battle of Gettysburg. And, I've been there as a volunteer and then an employee. I started, I think, in 1989. So I've been there.
Oh, you've been there a long time.
A long time.
Oh, okay.
And I have always tried to organize and collect and make available the accounts of the people who live here at the time of the battle. So our forte is the civilians that lived in the area at the time of the battle. And we have files on all the major civilian accounts, and we try to promote the civilian accounts, and we try to make it easy for people who are writing books on the battle to come and use our resources so that when they write books on the battle, that they can incorporate the accounts by the local citizens. And so more and more and more, you see books, modern books, incorporating the local story into the story of the battle.
Right.
And that's, that's one of our primary missions. We're in right now, the building we're in is temporary, and we are looking at a long range goal of eventually moving into a new facility somewhere. We own some property near town, and we're talking about a major campaign. And, this is something that's going to come up in the next couple of years here, building a new society. And then we will have an Adams County History Museum. We differ from the National Park in that we're not the story of the battle and the soldiers that fought here in the National Park. We'll probably have stuff in our museum collection dealing with the battle and how it affected local people, not just during the prior to and during the battle, but we'll probably talk about how the commercialism and memorialization of the battlefield has over the years also affected the Gettysburg civilians. Like, people around town or battlefield tour guides. It's amazing to me when you go into the guide room and you talk to the other guides. At any given time, there's like 150 to like 170 battlefield tour guides, and they're representatives from all over the county. Like, the mayor of Gettysburg was a battlefield tour guide. The mayor that just died here last week that you might have seen in the paper.
Bill Troxel.
Bill Troxel died? He was a former mayor, and he was a tour guide.
He tore up a parking ticket I got once. He was a good man.
Very good. Very good. Yes, he did that for me one time, too.
I liked him.
So also, the Reverend of the Presbyterian Church, when Nixon visited and, attended a church service there, Bob McCaskill was a battlefield tour guide at the time, and I knew him for many years, and the superintendent of one of the schools and all the teachers at the schools. And
Colonel Sheeds.
Bob was a teacher at one of the local schools. So, the tour guides were a large part of the community. And, even if somebody had another job, tour guiding, the battlefield's always part of the local community and the history of the community since the battle was fought. It's something you really can't escape.
Right.
And so, I'm sure in our museum that we're going to have displays on the town. So, and that's going to come within the next 5 years eventually. But so it's interesting. The society started in the courthouse, and then went to the seminary building, and then we're going to go to another museum. But our museum will be much different than the Park Service Museum, and our primary story is the history and development of Adams County, not the battle.
So Tim, I'm sorry, can I jump in for a minute?
Yeah.
So for a long time, you were in the famous seminary building, the one that was here during the battle, that John Buford, Sam Elliott supposedly was up on top of there.
On Saturdays, I would often go up and sit in the cupola and eat lunch.
Oh, how cool is that? And you were probably mistaken as a ghost if you were ever up there at night. I think one of the officers of the Adams County Historical Society was once photographed up there at night, and ended up that picture was in a display of pictures with the caption "Ghosts at Gettysburg?" ?
Jeez.
But anyway, what I was going to get to though is, so it's not there any longer today. That's a museum, the Seminary Ridge Museum. But so our listeners could visit you. Where are you today? Temporarily,
we're on 368 Springs Avenue is our address. And there is a $10 research fee, unless you're a member. And then, of course, you come in and research as much as you want for free.
How much is it to be a member?
$40. You can. It's
a year.
It's the lowest level a year, yes. And then we have different levels of membership, because sometimes whole families join. But we have students, like students at Gettysburg College or Gettysburg High School, they research for free.
Or people studying to get their license to be a guide,
a lot of people come in who, they might be studying to be a guide, and then we sit in a Civil War research room. We also have, since battlefield guides are part of the community, battlefield guides have donated their libraries of Civil War books to us.
Oh, cool.
So we have some pretty nice, rare regimental histories of the battle, or early texts in the battlefield. I personally have already donated all my collection of pamphlets and memorabilia of the battle.
Oh, neat.
So, I have, in my collection, all the early tour books by all the early tour guides, and the tour book of the National Tower.
Oh, cool.
I have brochures from every
all the touristy stuff,
attraction in town. I was always into the tourist industry.
Yeah.
And my collection of postcards of all the motels that ever existed in town and all the museums.
Oh, that's awesome. Because I'm kind of interested in that too. That Jim Weeks book. Have you read that? Yeah, yeah. I like it. Are there any other books about that on that subject?
On commercialization and memorialization?
Yeah.
No,
that's weird, right?
I read about it sometimes, and I read Weeks' book, and it seemed like he was getting way too deep into it.
Yeah.
But
it's the only book out there.
Yeah. But when the Mumpers open up a gift shop in the Jenny Wade house, I don't think that they know that they're starting a trend of battlefield commercialization that will continue into the present day.
No, I'm pretty sure most people don't know that.
I think they're just trying to sell a postcard and make 10 cents.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Civil War Footsteps asks, Civil_War_Footsteps. I can't stand the underscores. I've read that Union veteran groups vehemently oppose the inclusion of Confederate monuments, not surprising. When and what was the first one, and did protests from veteran groups ever die down? So what was the first Confederate monument?
Okay.
Do you happen to remember?
Well, I would just say that, it depends on how you qualify it, but the first Confederate regimental monument is the 2nd Maryland Infantry on Culp's Hill, which is placed in November of 1886.
Now, let me, real quick, was that before, what is it, the 4th Alabama? There's a
marker there, and that was the early 1900s, a little marker on
So that was after.
Avenue. Yeah.
And that was put up by the federal government, though, right?
The 4th Alabama marker?
It's a little iron plaque.
No, but it was... Okay, the Gettysburg National Military Park Commission that was established in 1893 had 3 members.
Okay.
And it was earmarked that 2 of the members would be Northern veterans and 1 would be a Southern veteran.
Okay.
And I think William Robbins was a member of the commission, not one of the first members. I think the first Confederate member was a Florida veteran named Forney, but William Robbins became one of the commissioners, and that was his unit. The 4th Alabama. So he made sure that a marker was placed there on Confederate Avenue to the 4th Alabama.
Okay, so it wasn't the government, it was but it kind of was...
he had the government do it, but the purpose of that monument was, at that time, that the Park Commission realized that the Southern Army was not well represented on the battlefield. And Robin's idea was to, and some other people in the park, was to create this Confederate Avenue. And the Confederate Avenue would be the place where we would interpret the Confederate actions of the battle. The Confederate veterans themselves preferred, placing markers or monuments at the spot where their units fought. And the Northern veterans really didn't want that. And the commission really didn't want that. So William Robbins is kind of putting that up, saying, hey, look, here's my unit. We put up a marker back here near, on South Confederate Avenue to mark where we started our advance from. And so everybody else can do that also. But the Confederate veterans kind of didn't want that. And so they purposely, they really didn't do that. I mean, there was another marker put up to Robertson's Texas Brigade near the Texas State Monument in that same era. But eventually, they put up brigade plaques. So today we have a plaque for every brigade that fought in the battle, north or south. And the Southern Brigade plaques are along Confederate Avenue with the rounded granite bases. Now, they're not monuments. They're markers. So, when we talk about our monuments, we have, I don't know, it depends on how you count. I think Fred Hawthorne, he has, like
1,400?
No, it's even higher.
Oh, higher.
Yeah, it's over 1,500 monuments, markers, and tablets, because it's really difficult when you count. What do you count as a monument? What do you not count?
Well, you just said markers, monuments, and tablets.
That's right. Yeah. So
what about memorials?
So there's in the bigger scheme of things, I would say this, that there's not Confederate monuments on our battlefield.
Not many.
There's like 1,000 monuments, markers, and tablets, or, depending how you count. If you count the signs that say, the 40 Farm once stood here, or this is Cross Avenue, that we're counting those.
Okay.
When we get up to that total.
All right. So, okay.
So if we count, let's say there's 1,500, only 20 of them are put up by Southerners.
Yeah.
So the brigade plaques are not monuments.
But let's talk about why.
Hold on, real quick though. You said markers, plaques, monuments, right? There's also memorials, tablets. So these aren't interchangeable words. They all mean something, right?
Okay. Well, how about if we talk about things that were dedicated? Because really the brigade plaques are not dedicated.
Right.
No.
So the little tablets that you see around.
Yeah.
When he says about a score but there's 20, maybe a little more than 20. He's not counting all those tablets that the War Department put up and things like that. I don't even think that would count the 4th Alabama.
Now stop there. You're saying the word tablet. So explain to the people what tablet means as opposed to a monument.
An iron
or a marker.
Okay. So today, if you're on the auto tour, you'll see these wayside exhibits where there is a picture often and a brief description of what happened here on the battlefield. Would you consider
it's in color?
Those? I wouldn't consider those tablets, markers. But what are they doing?
I consider
they are informing a modern audience what happened there.
Right.
And so when the War Department puts these tablets up, it's got some of that there too. It's also marking the position of the Confederates, which is where they began.
But I'm trying to get to a very elementary thing here for people who are new to all of this. When you say tablet. Okay, and now they've heard this, and they're going to go around the battlefield. What are they going to see
so
and say, that's the tablet?
You're looking at usually something made of iron or bronze, and it is often, if it's Southern, it's black, and it's got white paint, I think, written on them. Am I right about that? Because some of them...
I thought those were the markers.
Well, those are the markers. Okay.
I thought the tablets were the ones that for the
brigades and the divisions and the corps. Okay.
The giant slab of stone with the iron on it
were not put there by the veterans for the purpose of honoring them.
Correct.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Tim, because you probably know more about this. They were put there by the War Department in the late 18 and early 1900s just to mark where the Confederates were and to help tell their story.
So let me ask you guys this then, if for simplicity's sake, if I were to say to someone who was coming here for the first time and they're new to all this, if you see something that is very drab and boring looking, it was put up by the government and that is a marker or a tablet, usually a slab of stone or with a chunk of iron on it, or
If it's boring, it was put up 100+ years ago. If it's not so boring, if it's color at wayside exhibits where the stops are for the auto tour, it's
wait. So going on to what I'm saying, that's a marker or a tablet, okay? Then if it looks artistic, that is a monument or, dare I say, memorial?
Sure. I mean, I don't think there's one name, and I don't think people have asked me this all the time. What's the difference between a monument and a memorial?
Mm-hmm. And?
No, I don't think there is a difference.
Right. Okay. Because we call memorials like state memorials, the North Carolina Memorial, that was dedicated. I think Tim used a good word there. If it was dedicated, it means that there were a group of people who thought it was important enough that they spent money for this, and they came here and they dedicated that monument at a particular point. Okay. The most recent of those we talked about last time, I think, the 11th Mississippi in the year 2000. There were a group of people there that thought it was important enough, and there was people, private citizens, who donated money for that, and they wanted to honor a particular group of veterans called the 11th Mississippi, even though no one in the 11th Mississippi was still alive in the year 2000. Okay. Most of the monuments that people think of monuments at Gettysburg were dedicated like that by Northern veterans who came 20, 25, 30 years after the battle, and they're placing somewhere on this battlefield where they fought a monument to what does a monument do? It monuments so that for all time, as long as it stands there, people will know this is where we were, this is what we did. And those are the kind of monuments I think that Tim's talking about when he's talking about maybe 20 or so, although most of those were not even from veterans. So why did Confederates not put many monuments up here? Well, they lost the war. The automobile had not been invented until much later when most of the monuments were placed here. And so would Southerners want to come all the way from down south by train? It would take quite an effort at a time when their economies are still recovering from the war. Would they want to put monuments up here at this place where they lost? No. So what do they do with their money to put monuments up? They're putting them up at their counties, their county seats of government, like Adams County, Gettysburg is the seat of government.
In the town square
square, right. So there's not many of those. The one that I'm aware of, and Tim, you tell me if there's more, is the one that he mentioned, the 2nd Maryland on Culp's Hill. But those guys are from Baltimore.
They're local.
It's fairly close. They can come here to see their monument.
So, but for the South, we have memorials, though.
State memorials.
State memorials, which I think is different. See, like a monument, I think they are specific things. A monument is something that marks something monumental, where a memorial is other people's tributes to the soldiers. So it's the state's tribute to its soldiers. They're memorializing their boys. Whereas the monuments are the actual participants marking the monumental thing that they did, the spot where they did something monumental.
I suppose, but what is the Pennsylvania thing called? Is it the Pennsylvania Monument or the Pennsylvania Memorial?
It's a state memorial.
But most people will call it the Pennsylvania Monument.
Well, yeah, because I think people interchangeably use these words. Yeah, but they're not interchangeable.
But in the one case, most of the memorials like that represent all the men from a particular state. And in my way of thinking, most of the monuments that I'm calling monuments are regimental monuments.
Here's what I like to point out in this controversy. A lot of people that I talk to on the battlefield who ask me about this, and it comes up occasionally in tours, people are curious about it, especially, in recent years where, we see Confederate memorials or monuments being removed, is that they think it's a modern thing. And they think that a lot of people believe that they're trying to erase history or these people or this is something new, like no one had a problem with it before. No, that's not true. This is an issue that has always been with us. And one of the issues early on was that Northern veterans simply did not want Southern monuments on the battlefield. There's no escaping that.
Right.
The Northern veterans do not believe that we should be commemorating the actions of the Southerners in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. I mean, think about it.
They didn't want him there.
Remember a few years ago, there was a big controversy because people wanted to put a mosque near Ground Zero. And everybody was all up in arms about that. It's the same kind of a emotion, I would imagine, for the Union veterans to the idea of having a monument to people that they fought against for years. Being put up the same way people reacted to that mosque being put up there.
Yeah, I don't want to get to the gist of the listener's question. The Second Maryland Monument was placed, the Second Maryland Confederate Monument was placed in November of 1886. A lot of the Northern veterans believed that the Marylanders snuck it there in the middle of the night. It's on Culp's Hill. And there's an article in the paper, the Pittsburgh GAR actually got together, took a vote, passed a resolution that the monument be removed from the battlefield, and it was publicized in the Northern newspapers at the time. So right afterwards, Northern veterans are protesting the Southern monument on the battlefield, and there's a big controversy over it. The only thing that really saved the Marylanders, and the reason the monument's still there at the same spot, is because they strategically placed it outside the Northern entrenchments. So if you look, there's the Northern entrenchment runs right beside the road, and it's placed just on the other side in the Confederate area. If they had placed it inside the Northern line of battle, it would have been removed.
Okay.
The other monument that was early on put up to honor a Southerner is, and I guess we don't feel the same about, or they didn't feel the same about this, is the marker where Armistead fell, put up by the Armistead family inside the angle. And I point out, if somebody asks about it, there's only two monuments. There's only two Southern monuments inside the Northern line of battle at Gettysburg. The advanced position marker for the 2nd Maryland, which people don't talk about much on Culp's Hill, and then the Armistead Fell marker. But, you know, in that sense, it's commemorating the death of someone. And even before monument, the first Civil War monuments are monuments that mark the death of someone, or the, the mortuary monuments. Like at Bull Run, who is it? Is it
B?
Bernard B?
He has a little.
The guy with the
Bartow.
quote?
No, I think it's Bartow.
Oh,
Bartow. There was a little marker for where he fell.
I thought there was B, right below where Jackson was.
Yeah, B is there, but he did die in a guy named Bartow, though.
Okay.
I think 8th Georgia had a monument.
Okay.
Bartow, you say?
I haven't been there in years, so you might be right.
But he doesn't have it there anymore. It's not there anymore. But, there were markers that were placed, like the Soldiers National Cemetery Monument, or the one in Second Manassas, to honor dead. Yeah. And, I think the concept of honoring the sacrifice of your soldiers is something that most people don't have any issue with. The issue with that the Northern veterans were concerned with the Southern monuments is that they would put statements on about how they were right. About how they were, and to me, today, that's the thing that I look for on some of the monuments that people question. What is the statement of the monument? What is the monument commemorating? Are we commemorating the men who died, or are we, trying to commemorate a cause that they fought for? And it is controversial. And so here's the thing. The Northern veterans dealt with this from the 1880s until the early 1900s. And then they came up with this really cool concept of putting up brigade plaques to tell the story of the Southern units in the battle, to mark the position where those units started from without memorializing their actions.
And what would they base that information off of? Because that was the government putting that up, right? Yeah,
well, at that time, the government had published the official reports of the War of the Rebellion. We talk about the official reports that were written by the commanders of the troops that fought here, the generals, the colonels, the regimental commanders for the most part, the brigade commanders, and how each one had to write a report of their actions, the North and the South, and those reports were submitted right after the battle to their immediate superiors and on up the chain. And these official reports were held in Washington, D.C., but in the 1880s, early 1880s, they were compiled into the official reports of the War of the Rebellion. Okay. And they were published. And so, now we have access to them, but we forget that they weren't published until a little bit later. And the publication of those things gave information. So when you go around the tablets and markers and you see the numbers given on them, they're from the official reports or they're from the official account of the battle. And the tablets might be, we used the word boring a few minutes ago. They're dry statistics. They're informational. There's no, on the tablets, they don't give like inspiring words about the men who were killed, or it notes it matter-of-factly. And so, it was a good, it really, really is helpful that they put up these brigade plaques, and not just Gettysburg, but also in Antietam and some of the other battlefield parks.
Okay, so we have so many more questions to get to, and we're at an hour. We're just over an hour with this one. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a separate upload. So thank you all for listening to this one, and we'll be back with we've got a zany one to start off at the top of the next one. So we'll see you then. Okay.
Should we take a break?
Take a break. I have to pee.
So is that all right?